So essentially this session this morning is going to shed a little bit of light on how your award nominations are judged, how we select those gold, silver and bronze winners, and also give a bit of guidance around the key things that the judges are looking for when they read your nominations. So joining us this morning, we've got Dr. Andrew Lana, who's the Chief Executive of iESE. Hi, Andrew.
Hi there.
We've also got our other judge, John Comber, who's our iESE Associate, former Chief Executive of the Royal Borough of Greenwich. Hi, John.
Hello, good morning.
If you do have a question during this session this morning, do pop it into the chat. We're going to be doing questions towards the end of this little presentation, but we'll try and address them as and when they pop up. So we're going to start off by talking a little bit around the objectives behind our awards, talk a bit about the judging process and the scoring behind all of it. We're going to show you a couple of stats from last year's awards, highlighting sort of like the quantity of nominations we receive across the different categories. And then we've got some key kind of top tips for when you're drafting your nominations, and then we'll open the floor up to questions. So I'm going to start off just quickly sort of going through some key dates, the timeline kind of around the awards process. So first thing to flag, we have had a number of people requesting extensions for the awards. So we have now created a deadline extension for Friday, the 20th of January. So you've got an extra 7 days now to submit your nominations. So hopefully you'll be able to take away some of the stuff that we discussed today and feed that into your nomination as well. So from the deadline on the 20th of January, we then kind of have 2 weeks of judging. So this is when the judges go away, look at all of your nominations. We'll then be feeding back to everyone to let you know if you've been successful or not around the week of the 6th of February. We then spend a little bit of time gathering information for the award ceremony, so asking about who are you going to be sending as your representatives to attend, food choices, all of that kind of stuff. We've got a deadline for the 24th of February for all of that information. And then we've got the award ceremony, which is on Wednesday, the 8th of March, which is going to be at Church House in London, as always. And then following the award ceremony, we then publish a special edition of Transform magazine. So this is essentially like an awards winners edition, and we'll also be publishing all of our photos from that awards evening as well. And that will all be published on the 10th, so 2 days after the award ceremony. And then we'll come back full circle. Nominations will then open for next year's award on the 4th of September. So I'm now going to hand over to Andrew, who's going to talk a little bit about the sort of objective behind the iESE Awards.
Thanks, Annabelle, and welcome everybody. So what he wanted to do, John and I, is to get over a sort of flavour of the background and the approach to the awards, because hopefully that will help you with your submission. But the first thing to say is that our objective in terms of the judging of the awards is to help you tell your best story. We're not here to set a hurdle over which you will jump without any guidance. So if there's any sort of questions either today or later, please do come back to us. Projects in the real world take many years to conceive. They run through various phases, and they're not single instance flash in the pan. So if you see an award scheme where you just submit and never darken the door again, this is not it. So we want to build a relationship with you over the stages of your project. So we'll come on later as to what that means in terms of judging, but the advice really is to submit early and often, year on year. So we quite often will have someone that might submit something at its earliest stages. They get a certificate of excellence, they come back and they go through, increasingly higher bronze, silver and gold awards. So please do see this as a journey, not as a one-off submission. Our objective is to actually get as close to what we call future best practice, because of course as soon as something's written down, it's already happened and it's out of date. But future best practice as possible, in order to help transform the sector. So we put a lot of effort into sharing what you've done in terms of events and publications, and Transform magazine that Annabelle mentioned has got about 6,000 readership in terms of physical copy and about the same in terms of digital, and it's read actually in multiple countries, which has actually led to the international category. So we now have a number of countries submitting for that particular category of award as well. So that's the objective, us to help you to help the sector, and we can sort of move on from there. So in terms of the judging process, we look at the initial, it goes through various stages. So the two dimensions that are important are innovation and impact. And of those, if you like, the innovation is probably in all cases the most important. But in terms of this judging process, there are marks awarded for each. And what we end up with, very much like in a degree marking exercise after people have done their exams, is you end up with people in sort of rank order, and then we check the boundaries between grades, etc. on those. But at that point, because sometimes there is very fine differences between submissions, we will then, as a panel of judges, go through and say, okay, what's the right order, and then moderate the marks to fit. So the final marks that come in might necessarily be reflective of the objective grade. But that will give us a clear rank between the best, as it were, who are receiving the gold, silver, and the bronze in terms of each category. So the other thing to probably say is that, and we'll come on to it later in terms of the transformation model, but we do have a set of objective standards behind this as well. And where we don't have any submissions meeting the grade, as it were, then we will, and have done, not often, but have done, close the category. But likewise, if we had lots of submissions, only one makes the grade, we will still award. But also, where we find a cluster of things that actually don't quite fit, they're scoring lower in that category, but there's a new story emerging, we will open up a new category and we'll put them into them. That's part of that, helping you tell your best story. So we will find a way to draw out groups of awards that and create a category for them where it's sort of warranted.
Well, I think that's a really powerful thing about these awards, that it's trawling for innovation across the industry. That's almost more important than the categories themselves. So that sitting down and helping you tell your best story is really important. But if you've had something that really looks special, have a discussion with iESE to make sure that it can be nominated in, even if there's no category that it actually wholly fits with, because it may end up forming a new category on it in its own right.
Yeah, and we're very conscious that you will be ahead of us. You will all be trialing out new things because you have to. And therefore we need to follow you rather than vice versa. We also fund the event, actually do it through sponsorship actually, but so you will be invited to bring 2 representatives to the awards ceremony. Obviously the travel is your cost, but actually the event itself is fully paid for. There's no table costs, there's no meal costs, etc. All of that is borne by us. We did have, in the very early years, we had a query by the Taxpayers Alliance. They were what was objecting to their local council being winning Council of the Year because it was a waste of his taxpayers and money. And when we told them actually no, he hadn't spent any taxpayers' money on it, he then went away delighted and became their biggest fan. So it was something to do with the 16-foot high banner they put across the front of the council building, I think. So yes, they will be invited to the ceremony. It's a great event. It is in Church House in London, and it's the only event at which ministers will turn up in terms of awards. They don't tend to do that, but this one they make an exception for. That may be a good or a bad thing. So that's in terms of the judging process. A little bit more on that in terms of something around the categories. For those of you that are mathematically inclined, you'll see that the numbers there on the categories don't add up. There are also some of the year categories, so Council of the Year, Fire Service of the Year, Police Service of the Year as well. Where people make the objective grade for excellence, we will issue a certificate of excellence even where they have not achieved a gold, silver and a bronze, and that's a good indication. It also means that you're automatically pushed through to next year's awards as a part of that process. We do as much as we can to help inform you, so we will share your score back and we'll tell you how that fitted amongst others. We are in the process of developing more collateral so that you can see what an ideal answer looks like. The reality, of course, is there's no such thing as an ideal answer that we've got in our backstock, so we have to create people are better at different things. So we will be this year, as we go through the process, which is quite an involved one, creating a set of model sort of answers which can help you, because essentially that's what we're trying to get out of you is said your bbest story. Maybe just a minute. And so we've got a few top tips in terms of the submission itself. We're going to go through a few things here, and if we don't cover everything, again, you know, Q&A at the end. The first one is the very obvious one, but it is very common mistake, which is essentially the category tells you around the problem you're trying to solve, and you yourself will have a project that you're trying to solve. Well, so describe that. Actually, speak to the question. It's quite often that we will get, and also with one caveat, submissions where actually you're not answering the questions that are asked, and whilst we look for every scrap of information in your submission to provide marks for the scheme, it's quite often the case those that are getting poor marks, it's not because they've not necessarily done anything well, it's just they've not actually answered the question that was asked.
But it's worth saying, start with the description. If you set out what the problem is at the very start, you can then play it back to the category and make sure that you are answering the question. But it's no surprise to anyone, you know, you're hard pressed at the coalface, you're doing the day job. But we do receive many applications where the problem has not been adequately or properly described. Now, this doesn't mean you fail. It does mean you'll get some advice back to add to the description, to flesh it out. But it's important with the number of applications that are being received that it becomes harder to give that feedback. So this is a really important part. Start with the description, set out what the problem is, describe it adequately so that when you read it back, if you were a stranger, you would completely understand what it's all about.
Thanks, John. Yes, and again, this is obviously where if you're not sure that it fits the category, and by the way, as I think it's been said elsewhere, but in the QA you can submit the single project for more than one category. So that obviously is to help you if you're not quite sure, but also actually sometimes, you know, real world is a project has a number of dimensions and it can easily fit in more than one category. But also stay true to the purpose of the project, because that was what will allow us to say, okay, this is a different category that doesn't exist. Let's create something that fits that. So all that we're after, if you like, is things that will make a meaningful difference to the performance of local public services, which we can share with other people. We are not slaves to those categories. As I mentioned, there's sort of two dimensions to the marking, of which the most important is innovation. One of the categories, not surprisingly, the innovation category, it is the only criteria that is important. And because of course there we're looking at absolutely bleeding edge that may not even have been tried out yet, other than at the very cursory sort of pilot stage, or even pre-pilot in terms of modelling. So innovation in terms of your project is really important, and this is obviously so that we can find new things that will help the sector itself improve. We over many years have working with others have developed a model of the stages of transformation. There's a link on the slides that will take you to the white paper, and it's been taken up and used by, amongst others, the LGA and COSLA in their sort of view of how well a council is modernising. In fact, actually, it's been taken up internationally. We've got about 12 countries using that approach now. And just loosely speaking, you know, the service one is where, you know, the old days we would have leaned professional. We would have got our process, our service as efficient and effective as possible. Customer centric is, you know, when you start to remove concepts of individual professions and start managing things around the customer. And then community is effectively where you're starting to move upstream to real root cause and divert demand. So you're probably doing, you know, the middle thing might be categorized as doing the same things in a different way. The third category is sort of doing totally different things. So you're doing things that stop the demand for public service emerging. Actually, innovation can happen at all three levels. I mean, during the pandemic, one that sort of hit me as being a really good example. I live just on the edge of Dorset, and I look out over Isle of Wight, and if I want to go there, it takes me many hours of train along the coast and a very slow ferry out, and then transport at the other end. And they had a problem of getting medication out there during the pandemic, and that from the mainland, and that was taking quite a few hours. And they developed a drone delivery system that actually cut that down to kind of minutes. And that was in essence, the service was simply a delivery, so very much at that level one service level. But actually, the use of that actually was very transformative. You know, very, very important in terms of getting medication out there quickly. So that was a pretty good example there. But actually, you know, at the level that actually will have most meaningful impact to the sector and to our communities is very much that diverting demand, and it's very common in social care, but less common in other services. So it is the area that most of the new things that come through are in that sort of space.
And it's probably worth saying no authority is at any one of these levels. It's very likely that any organisation will be spread across all three levels, which is why innovation can happen at any of those levels. So it's possible that you can have absolutely innovative against a service being delivered which has been improved, and they sit side by side. So remembering that this is about projects within an organisation, you could have and submit a project at level 1 and a project at level 3. It just reflects that organisations are at different stages for different services and functions.
But hopefully what it'll do is it'll help you create that clearer description of what it is that you're trying to achieve, that purpose which we set out at the beginning. The other key dimension, so I'm about to be mugged by the dog, so I'll be getting some bribery out in a moment to keep him quiet. The other key dimension obviously is impact. That varies, of course. We recognise fully, and as we should, that you know, if you've got a really innovative project at the early stage, we really want to hear about it, but you may not have as much evidence about what that would mean in full rollout. But there will be some kind of case that's been developed, even if it's a sort of light bulb business case that speaks to that impact in some way. So in the innovation one, it might, you know, simply be that, which is that if this were deployed, it would have this impact. So I'll give you a practical example of that one that's come across our desk recently. Is a guy that saw the impact of the Grenfell fire, saw the amounts of money that people were spending on cladding. He went back to the root cause and said, okay, so what starts the fires in the first place, rather than how do we stop them transmitting up the outside of the building, because they will still transmit up the inside of the building, and found that 97% of them were based upon either electrical faults in the wiring or in the white goods. And so he's invented a new fire socket that detects the precursors to a fire starting and shuts itself down and communicates with all the other sockets in the building. So it's being used up in Scotland. So when the fire engine turns up, it'll tell you in which room in the building the fire is and whether it's spreading, etc. And it also links to the fire signs. It tells you which way to go out the building. It'll swap the arrows around and do all that kind of stuff. So in that particular instance, he's not rolled it out yet, other than in a very small pilot. But actually, you can see from the description the impact that could have in business case terms because of the cost of it. Versus the impact of removing all the remaining fires in large buildings. So that's a sort of really good example of that. In terms of other projects, you will find that easier. So you might, in the pandemic we had people who are doing simpler things, but at scale, the difference between an ice cube and an iceberg is they're both lumps of ice, but one of them is a little bit more impressive than the others. And so you were getting councils done some significant things very quickly to prepare themselves for working digitally in that sort of new environment.
And it's probably worth saying you can express the impact in customer terms, resident terms. You can express the impact in staff terms. You can express the impact in elected members, locally elected member terms. So it can be expressed in different ways. If you cover all of those categories, then you have a comprehensive approach. But if you're expressing it in terms of the resident, the customer, then you can't go far wrong because you're actually describing what you're there to address.
It's actually internal as well, just to say it's not whilst we're overall what we're trying to do is obviously have a transformational effect on the sector, that is quite legitimate that is an internal sort of process as well. So next slide. So next point is evidence. So we get a variety of forms of evidence. Sometimes people think that the description they've given is so obvious that they don't necessarily need to say any more. Well, you do. Please describe how you've done things and then also provide evidence in the form that is natural for that project, because what consists of, what evidence looks like varies. So in some things where they're perhaps soft skill based or softer issues, it could be quotes, it could be interviews, etc., etc. It could be that you've got a data project, in which case, the bottom left there, you'll have graphs, you'll have real hard numbers that show what's happening in terms of the evidence, etc. And actually, external reference and take up. So we had, I think, Surrey, who'd done a project on data analytics, which had been taken up by the BBC amongst others, and that was good evidence that there's a third party that was saying, yeah, we kind of use this because we think it's best in breed. And then we've had everything from PDF files of evidence through to videos, through to people wanting to come back and talk to us and walk us through stuff to help them then say how they describe it. So, and we've done all of that, so if at any stage you say, look, I'm thinking about putting this down and not sure, whether it's appropriate, then ask. We're not here to screen things out. We're here to help things in. Anything else on that one, John?
I think it's making sure that the evidence is related to the project itself. It's not general in nature. So being very clear about the metrics applying to the project itself and the purpose of the project and the outcome of the project. As you've said, any evidence can come in any form, really. It doesn't matter what form it takes. It's appropriate to the project and the type of project you're undertaking, but it can't be a general description or a customer number. It needs to be more specific than that. And the more specific it can be to the project, the better the evidence is.
And that point made earlier in terms of, your evidencing might change in nature. So if it's a pilot stage, that's quite acceptable. It's as long as it's speaking to the stage that you're at versus full rollout, for example. But if you're a full rollout, we would expect something more around the impact of that. So it's horses for courses. The other thing is that the evidence mustn't trump the description at the beginning. So there can be a tendency to, in some instances, to take an existing business process, not do anything to it, and fossilize it with modern technology, and rather than actually reinventing it and then using the technology to support that transformation process. Doesn't happen everywhere, but it can happen. So the important thing is that actually, that seed of innovation, that reinvention is there, and the description sits around that. So that's probably enough on that particular one. Final top tip I mentioned earlier, which is this is a journey. Real life projects take years and go through various phases. So keep coming back at each stage, and at each stage we will help you, and we will support you in any way we can to get that best story out of you. So hopefully, this year will be the beginning of a relationship with you, and that relationship won't just help you and ourselves, but hopefully will help the sector as a whole.
And it's worth saying, innovation is a bumpy road. It seldom runs smoothly. There are setbacks, there are unintended consequences, there are issues that arise along the way. And that's why it's so important to really address this about keep coming back. The journey's hard. It's never been a more difficult environment for local government councils to work in, and local public services generally. So I think the notion that we join you on that journey, we help you as much as we can, and we encourage as much as we can as well, because this is about the industry has to improve over time because of the constraints it faces, because of the challenges it faces. And so it's never been more innovative. You have never been more innovative. And the important part of this is charting those journeys, making sure everybody knows what's going on wherever best practice is being formed, or future best practice, as we call it, is being formed, and being able to map that back so others can join you on the journey, others can contribute to that journey, others can take advantage of that journey. It's really important. So your tenacity is really welcomed, and iESE sits ready to take that journey with you, recognising that it may take years to bring it to fruition. It may at times pause, it may at times rush forward, but actually keeping going is really important, and we're in it for the long term. If it takes years, so be it. It takes years.
And part of that, because you will in many projects you quite often go down a blind alley and will come back again and go down a different alley. Describing those blind alleys and actually the results and why you didn't go down that is important. We're just setting up the next major transformation of the Dubai government at the moment, and the support for the chief execs of the various government bodies is exactly that, making the right decision about not going to the next stage and going back and doing stuff again and then going down a slightly different direction is as important, because that's the real world, and it's that real world that we're interested in. That's much more authentic. Annabelle, you got a hand up. Sorry.
Yeah, so we've just had a question come in, so I thought we'd just address it as it's coming from Roz. So he said that we've mentioned many times about councils, but just wanted to check that other public sector groups can apply. So the big answer is yes.
My apologies. So the answer, so we should speak much more neutrally. We normally describe local public services. So anyone that's delivering a public service in the UK can submit. All of these categories are open to that. Obviously, the of the year categories are the only ones that are restricted: fire service of the year, council of the year, etc.
And I should apologise for that too, and say it's not just public sector bodies. So that you can be in partnership with a private sector body. There are categories for that as well. This is genuinely about finding innovation wherever it is that can help. So we're looking for that innovation from whatever source it is. and that includes there are small startup businesses trying to break in to support local public services in their supply chain, and that's part of this process as well. Wherever there is a relationship forming with a private sector organisation, that could be really beneficial to others to understand how it's taking shape and what it's delivering. So we're looking for all of it.
Particularly, I mean, the bit that we're looking for is companies that bring innovations, as opposed to where you're perhaps using them as just a transfer of a delivery arm out. So the example I mentioned of the kind of sockets, etc., as being, okay, let's not stop the transmission up the outside of the building, stop the fire in the first place. You know, so they've come along, they've invented something which could be really helpful to the sector. And as we all know, you know, public procurement actually is a bit of a dark art, and as a small business, getting into the sector can be very difficult. So actually anything that we can do to spotlight, you know, something like that, it might not be quite as, you know, technologically based as that. I mean, although the similar one, Camden have done a very hyper local air quality monitoring, which is very different from the standard, and that's using a private, actually charitable partner that's actually doing that with them, so that you can reroute kids through to school, avoiding what are daily variations in air quality. So where you've got those kind of innovations, you're working with someone, please do bring those forward as well. You know, the innovation category, we allow those companies to put in direct, but actually any of the other categories, if they come in where they're working with you, that's fine.
We've got another question. So do we have, this is from Trudy, do we have a template or example of a format that you'd expect? Although we don't have sort of an example of a good nomination as of yet, we are planning this year to gather and share sort of those gold standard nominations for next year. We do sort of say as a guideline that the maximum amount of words is 5,000. So I suppose maybe take that as a little bit of a guideline for how much you should be writing, and just making sure that you are covering all of those key sections about how does your initiative show innovation, how has your initiative had an impact, how has it improved the skills and capabilities in your team, what's the quality of the delivery of the initiative, all of those things, sort of use that, I suppose. And as well, I suppose the information that we sort of shared with you today, hopefully that's been helpful.
If in doubt, give us a call. You know, we'll always give you feedback, and if you've got a draft that's not that far away now, you know, we have also reviewed drafts and given tips and advice. So we'll do everything we can within the time that's available to help you.
And the criteria does have headings: award category, organisation, nominee, overview of the nomination, description of the innovation, impact, the people involved and how that's affected the organisation, quality of delivery, contribution to the sector. So they're broad headings, and they will be enhanced by the work being done to give examples of best nominations. But at least addressing those gives you a start within that 5,000 word limit. But as Andrew says, if in any doubt at all, ask, because we're here to help you tell, as Andrew said, your best story. And it really matters that is got out, so the industry can work with that as well.
So but a couple of extra questions there. One is, should you reference last year's application if this year's one is project resulted from it? I think that's helpful, because that speaks to the timeline, although because there's consistency in the judging, we will normally pick that up. But actually, when you've got 2 weeks of reading several hundred scripts and going through stuff, you know, you can miss stuff. So yeah, anything you can do to help us help you would be fantastic. So thanks for that, Paul. Gareth, you talked about you know, if you were successful in last year's awards, can you resubmit? Yes, you can. We've had a number of councils, in fact one, I think it was last year, the year before, that actually had 2 golds in a row in one category. It was very much the same team. How do you distinguish one from the other? There's either a difference in the innovation or the impact. You know, that's, you know, if it's exactly the same thing coming back in again, then of course that's not gonna the innovation will have disappeared, if you like, and the impact, there's no additional impact. But So you need to sort of distinguish in that way. But so, for example, Cumbria digital team had done created a new method of application development, or adopted that, which was very interesting, and they'd had some really successful rollout of some new applications very rapidly that had a huge impact, and it demonstrated a new way of working. They then did the same thing again during the pandemic, but focused on some of the issues for the pandemic, different applications, a really meaningful impact, and demonstrating as ever that local government and other local public services punch above the weight in many other sectors, and they won the gold again. So it's certainly possible to do. If you've got any doubt on that, again, in specific circumstances, give us a call.
Just a couple of other frequently asked questions that we get in the inquiries inbox. I thought I'd just share. Please do type any questions in the chat. The floor's yours. It's your chance to ask now. So can you send in more than one nomination for your organisation? Absolutely. The more nominations you send in, there is probably higher chances that you may win that Council of the Year, that Fire Service of the Year, Police Service of the Year award, because you're showing that you've got sort of exceptional best practice across a range of different projects and things. So it kind of gives that evidence to why you should be winning those of the year categories as well. What other ones have we got? Can you be nominated for more than one category? Yes, I think we've already explained this. So if you are unsure which category it applies for, tick as many as you think is relevant. The judges may decide that it is better suited elsewhere, and will move it accordingly. As we've previously said, we want to help you share your best story, so we want to make sure that you're shining, that you're getting the results that you deserve. What have we had in the chat?
So how does the panel view organisations submitting different projects for the same category? I mean, we are after your best story and the sector's best stories. So we have had councils do clean sweeps in a category before. It doesn't happen often, but we have had it because we follow the numbers in terms of that assessment. So we're not trying to, some award schemes have been accused of saying, oh, this year a district council or a fire service or whatever is going to win this award because they haven't won one for a few years. What we're after is stories that make a difference. So that does come up with odd consequences sometimes, but that's the rule that we follow. So and as Annabelle says, if we see that you put in 3 in one category, and actually we think one of those 3 actually has got a much better chance of telling a good story in another category, then we won't move it category.
It just cut out there a little bit, Andrew. Do you want to just repeat that last bit?
Just to say that when we think it will have a better story in another category, we don't move it, we copy it. So we'll judge it under the category in which you submit it, but we may also judge it under another category as well. There's another question there from Roz. If you think this isn't about plumping things out, or it's very difficult to give a simple do it this way, because projects are very different. If you feel you've adequately described your project without using 5,000 words, that is fine. I mean, there tends to be a balance. Some people put in a video or put in other things that actually round out the submission, and the words are almost a way of conducting all of the instruments in the orchestra in terms of what they've submitted. So very much down to you to judge that. But again, if you're not sure, then let us know.
Right, well, if you've got any more questions, do let us know. Otherwise, we might just let you go a bit early. 18 minutes back to yourself, I think. So as we mentioned, we have got the deadline extension now, so please send in your nominations by 5 p.m. Friday the 20th of January. That is the cut-off point. Do send us an email if you do have any other questions. You can also contact myself directly, also my colleague Michelle. I'll quickly just drop our email addresses in the chat there, so you can contact us directly as well as the inquiries line. But pretty much thank you. Best of luck to you all, and we hope to see as many as you as possible on the 8th of March in our award ceremony. So thanks very much for joining us today.
Best of luck.
Thanks a lot, everyone.